by the ILA, the International Longshoremen Association. Almost every single one of them, when you look at their records, had a record of having been in prison for assault with a dangerous weapon and so forth, at times even murder too. One example is that the kind of scene we had in the waterfront, where in the basement of the church, the anti-mob longshoreman element are listening and planning how to fight against the mob, and then as they come out, there are goons waiting for them with the lead pipes, beating them up very badly. That I took directly from life. That actually happened. We shot it in Hoboken for several different reasons. One was the pictorial background, and but the other was that in Hoboken we could deal with the chief of police and have him assign his brother, who was a lieutenant on the police force, to set up a protection force for us. I got phone calls threatening me. It was Johnny Dio, who was Johnny Friendly in the movie. Johnny Dio, who worked with Jimmy Hoffa. In fact, they sort of apparently even planned it on the phone together, and that worried me.
The Teamsters Union, and Hoffa in particular, would have extraordinary power to close down businesses, to stop businesses, to virtually render you unable to make a living if you oppose them. And then there might even be fears beyond that you'd be physically harmed. At that time, it had that kind of economic power and political power. A lot of people don't remember that in the mid-1960s, the political power of organized crime was so great that the Justice Department went into court to try to stop the publication of the book, The Valachi Papers. The book that has turned out to be absolutely accurate about the condition of organized crime at the time. But because of political influence on then President Johnson and on the Justice Department of that time, the Justice Department went into court to try to block the publication of a book, which is, given our First Amendment and our right of free speech and at least so-called liberal orientation of that administration, that was an extraordinary fact, which gives you some sense of the power that at one time the mafia, organized crime, La Cosa Nostra had in the United States. In January 1959, January 1st, 1959, after a long history of having Fulgencio Batista, the head of the Cuban government, on the take, protecting the mafia's narcotics and gambling interests in Cuba, Fidel Castro came down from the Sierra Maestras and overthrew the Batista government. Batista gone. Castro took over, but the mafia was still comfortable because, as the mafia has always shown in any conflict situation, they hedge their bets. They'll support both sides in any given conflict situation. And they had done the same thing during the Cuban Revolution. They were shipping arms and ammunition to Batista. They were shipping arms and ammunition to Castro.
During the Kennedy administration, the government was keeping one terrible secret. And that secret was that the CIA had entered into an alliance with the mafia to assassinate Fidel Castro. And about this, there were no doubts. They had a Senate investigation of it. They have a paper record of it. The CIA entered into an alliance with Sam Giancana, Santos Trafficante, Johnny Rosselli, to murder the president of Cuba. This was something that that the government didn't want anybody to know.
Naturally, there would be some merging of interest between the CIA and the mob in dealing with the politicians in order to get the gambling that they wanted. And it probably also may go back to the days when the mob was rolling big in Havana during the Batista. And I'm convinced that there were connections, definite connections between Gene Cana and the CIA to give some credence to the kill Castro theory.
When Castro took over, my father lost. He lost a great deal of money. And I think the reason the CIA approached Sam was because of his knowledge of Cuba.
Soon after Castro had taken over, Hoffa orchestrated a multi-million-dollar Teamster pension fund loan, which led to the shipment of a fleet of C-74 Globemaster aircraft to the new Cuban government. To us, it was a sign of good faith between Hoffa, the mob, and the Cuban government saying, hey, listen, we can all continue to do business. But in April of 1959, Castro wipes out the gambling casinos. He shuts down the narcotics operation. He exiles Carlos Marcello, Meyer Lansky. He imprisons Santos Trafficante. So with all of these operations going into the toilet, Meyer Lansky says, I put $1 million contract on anybody who will kill Castro.
Y nosotros los cubanos, si tenemos vergüenza, que hay mucho todavía que la tienen.
Many of us Cubans are embarrassed because of our work situation. And let's face it, some of us are. We have to recognize that Mayor Lansky stimulated tourism in Cuba. He brought money in instead of taking it out. He opened several casinos. He put thousands of Cubans to work. He organized Cuban tourism in concert with other nations. In the 2 or 3 years that he was here, that he was involved with Cuba, Cuba gave nothing to him, but he gave much to Cuba.
Cuba no le dio nada. Él le dio mucho a Cuba.
And then in December of 1959, Castro did a major policy speech, and he announces that he's a communist. Now, he's not just alienated the mafia, but he's alienated the United States government, which is not going to be putting up with some communists 90 miles off the coast of Florida. So Alan Dulles, the head of the Central Intelligence Agency, says, we are going to take that contract against Castro. We're going to work with the mafia to kill Fidel Castro.
The Church Committee showed that the numerous efforts to kill Fidel Castro, organized by the Central Intelligence Agency, were to be executed by the CIA's junior partner, the Mafia.
There was a set of attempts by the CIA to assassinate foreign leaders, to assassinate Diem in Vietnam, Lumumba in the Congo, Trujillo in the Dominican Republic, and a series of attempts to assassinate Castro in Cuba.
The conspiracy to assassinate Castro first began under the Eisenhower administration, and the man who was in charge of that, the action man, was Vice President Richard Nixon. Then after Kennedy was elected, the CIA inherited that plot from the previous administration and went forward with it, not telling Kennedy all the details.
The original liaison between the CIA and the Mafia in the Castro assassination plot was Jimmy Hoffa. And Jimmy Hoffa brought 5 Mafia figures into the plots themselves. One was Russell Buffalino, the underboss of the Joseph Bonanno crime family in northeastern Pennsylvania, whose cousin was his personal attorney, William Buffalino, in Detroit. He brought in Salvador Granello and Jimmy Plumeri, 2 capos in the Tommy Lucchese crime family. He brought in John LaRocca, the boss of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and he brought in Gabriel Manarino, the underboss of the Pittsburgh crime family. These 5 guys, Granello, Plumeri, Buffalino, LaRocca, and Manarino, were the initial phase of the CIA Mafia plots to assassinate Fidel Castro. As a result of this, a big spotlight came on Hoffa. He was at center stage, and anyone who came close to him was at center stage as well.
The assassination problem is not confined to Mr. Castro, and therefore it cannot be dismissed upon the grounds that Castro took actions, including making Cuba a missile base in later months, that in retrospect might have justified such extreme activity.
John Roselli represented Giancana in Las Vegas. We like to refer to him as the godfather of Las Vegas, but the truth is it's really Giancana. And Roselli's power comes from Giancana. But he also had his own, I mean, he had no problem. Now, when the CIA recruited Roselli, he brought in Sam Trafficante and Sam Giancana. The unholy three are now working for the CIA to kill Castro.
So Hoffa, who was in this very sensitive position as the liaison between the CIA and the Mafia and the Castro assassination plots, had to be replaced. He was replaced by Bob Mayhew, who was the right-hand man to Howard Hughes. Bob Mayhew had a different approach to this. He decided that the man he wanted to get involved in the CIA plots against Castro was Santos Trafficante, who had since been released from the Cuban prison. But Mayhew did not. Mayhew told me during my interviews with him that he did not know Santos Trafficante personally. And he knew that in order for somebody to deal with Trafficante, it was going to have to be another boss at that same level of status with Trafficante. But Mayhew did not know a boss. But he did know Johnny Roselli, and this was the second stage of the CIA Mafia plots to assassinate Fidel Castro. Mayhew to Roselli, Roselli to Giancana, Giancana to Trafficante.
It is likely that at the very moment President Kennedy was shot, a CIA officer was meeting with a Cuban agent in Paris and giving him an assassination device for use against Castro.
I believe it was a hypodermic syringe they'd given him with something called black leaf number 40 in it. This was in response to Amlash's request that he be provided some sort of a device whereby he could kill Castro. He returned this device to the case officer. The case officer brought it back to Washington, and that was the end of the plot. I'm sorry I didn't give him a pistol, because it would have made the whole thing a lot simpler and less exotic.
As I've said, Sam wanted Castro dead. He would have been dead. And I think my father played his hand the way he wanted to play his hand in Cuba. And the government was paying Roselli and my father good deals of money. Why should he end up killing Castro? For what reason? I don't know if the laugh is on the United States or if in the CIA, or if the laugh